Good morning. I am Bridget Lake, president of the Oviedo Winter Springs Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Thinking Outside the Mask, COVID-19 and the Remote Workforce, presented by our chamber member, Newland Associates. The Oviedo Winter Springs Regional Chamber is here to serve as a platform for enhancing business and community interests in our region, our vision being the crossroad connecting commerce and community. And now Newland Associates is a leading provider of outplacement, career management, executive coaching, and leadership development services across Florida and beyond. They have 30 years of expertise in executive recruitment, talent management, and consultant needs. I am now pleased to introduce you to Trisha Holliday, Vice President of Talent Strategy at Newland Associates. Trisha, how are you doing today?
I'm really well. Thank you for allowing us to be here. We're very excited. You know, to achieve your objectives and to crush your competition, it's your job as a business leader to make sure that you're optimizing your number one asset, your people. We've been helping you all for 30 years by providing guidance and best practices to align your people strategy with your organizational strategy. As you just shared, all in all, from HR advisory, affirmative action compliance, diversity initiatives, coaching, talent management, outplacement, or improving communications and operations by using predictive index, we decode the human to help you achieve your business goals. We are delighted to present Ann Beecham today. Ann earned her MBA in Human Capital Management and is completing her PhD in Organizational Psychology. She is certified by SHRM, Lean Six Sigma, and the Governor's Sterling Award in Leadership. My cattle rancher daddy would say, she's got the book learning, but can she find her way out of the cow pasture? Ann certainly can, as she was the lead HR executive for 15 years. A fun fact about Ann, she started working at age 11 beside her dad, a tax accountant. Picture a little girl posting assets, liabilities, and capital accounts into ledgers almost as big as she. Early on, Ann learned that business and people are not separate accounts. So without further ado, please welcome Ann.
Thank you, Trisha. And as we mentioned, and you just mentioned, we will now move on to our guest speaker, Ann Beacham. She is the Senior Human Resource Consultant with Newland Associates. Ann has an MBA with a concentration in Human Capital Development and has completed the coursework for her PhD in Organizational Psychology. That sounds very interesting. Ann has been associated with the Early Learning Coalition of Brevard and with CareerSource Central Florida, building their human resources system from the ground up. Ann is also an adjunct instructor for Valencia College School of Continuing Education. Welcome, Ann. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Bridget. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much
Great.
for joining us. This sounds like it's going to be a really interesting topic, especially with so many people dealing, or so many businesses dealing with the workforce working from home and virtually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess my first question for you guys is, do we have the presentation over there, and do you want to share my screen?
And Jordan, let's make sure that we can have her share her screen so that we will begin the presentation.
There we go.
Yep, she can. You can go ahead and steal it.
You want me to steal it?
Yep, go ahead.
You got it. I'll steal the screen. I'm cool with that. Let's see if we can.
And Newland Associates, we've actually used them at our Chamber of Commerce. The predictive index has been essential when it came to our workforce, and really was able to match us with the best candidates, not just for the job, but for the team, which I found incredibly helpful in our hiring process. So I really do want to thank Newland Associates for that. That was has been incredible. We're so glad that they're a member of our chamber, and it really is, they are great at what they do.
Thank you.
And it looks like she is in presentation mode, and we have your visual up on the screen. We're
That's
ready
great.
to take off.
So I want everyone to feel free to use the chat box feature in Zoom, if you are familiar with that, so that I can ask if you want to ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer them throughout the presentation. Or if you want to raise your hand, or you just want to say, hey, excuse me, I'm even cool with that, because I don't mind being interrupted at all. I actually raised 7 children, so I'm not really used to ending any sentences anyway. So just want you to know that 4 of our own and 3 foster sons. So usually I'm being interrupted all the time, but they're all big now and they all have their own health insurance, so I'm okay. So as Trisha told you, and Bridget mentioned, I'm with Newland Associates, and our tagline is that we decode the human. We have a bevy of human resource opportunities for people who are looking to enhance their workforce, or for some answers about compliance or talent needs. And this is our team. And here we are, everyone, in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic. No one could have ever predicted that COVID-19 would shut down not just America, but basically the world. And I know that we're all kind of still trying to find balance between what was before March of 2020 and what is today now at the end of September, after all these months of living in what everybody wants to call the new normal. And I do want to say that you know, we all are going to struggle to try to get back to what reality felt like a while ago. But I think that we all have to come to a stark understanding that this has changed the way that we have done work. Would you? And I know that you would all agree with me that on every level, the world has changed. Early on in this situation, I got a call actually from HR at a large nonprofit here in Central Florida, and this nonprofit had a call center. And the HR said, this is at the very beginning of March, maybe at the end of February, where the president of the organization wanted to send the call center home and just let them do their work from home. And the first thing I said was, do you understand? Please close the door, honey. Thank you. I'm so sorry. That's my sweet husband thinking I want breakfast. But the first thing that I said was that they have to understand that if they let their call center go home today, that call center is going to wonder when this is over, why they ever have to come back to the building again. And I said, is the president prepared for that conversation? And I don't think that anyone was prepared for that conversation at all. And I'm just gonna have to ask you to excuse me because I have to close the door. I'm so sorry. He's just the kindest person on the face of the earth. I've been married to him for 38 years, and he just thinks that I need things all the time. I'm a little bit of a princess. So ever since this happened, does everybody remember when Al Gore invented the internet? Anyone? Anyone remember that? Okay, good. These people, Generation X and those millennials, have been trying to convince these people that working at home is okay? I know as an HR professional and so that had, 300 or more employees, I can't tell you how many times in the last 20 years I've heard, well, why do I have to come to the office if all I do is sit in front of a computer? There is this thing called the internet now. I can work from home. And I have a very dear friend who is an attorney in Maitland, a partner, and she constantly said to me, the partners want me sitting in the office all the time. And I'm sure you've heard this. I get so much more done at home than I do in the office. But there's so much to consider, because although we've been forced into this new normal of remote work, the remote workplace really needs some work, because as everybody found out, it's not easy to manage work from afar. And it's not easy to understand who should be working from home, what jobs are actually really suited for that, and whether or not the company culture is going to survive the remote workplace. Because honestly, work isn't just about productivity. Work is about the people that you work with. And when that dynamic becomes really the diminishing factor in our work, then I think we're missing out on something every single day, because that interaction with other humans is really what makes our work exciting, and it makes our work also meaningful. So I want to talk to you about some strategies for remote work, because I think that it's been a question on people's minds. How do I know who I can work from home and who can't? And I hear from my clients and from other businesses that, well, this person is really great at work, and so I'm going to let them stay at work, but this other person is they just can't work from home. I just don't trust that everything's going to get done. And the first question I ask is, well, do they do the same thing? Is it the same job? Is it the same job title? Do they have the same position? And often the answer to that question is yes. So what I tell people, though, is that the first thing you really have to think about are the tasks that are associated with that person's job. And maybe not all of them, but maybe some of them. Are those things actually, are they really suited for remote work? And what about their responsibilities? How many people do they actually manage, or do they have responsibilities to other people in the organization, or to clients, or to vendors? And how formal are those responsibilities? I mean, if you are a business to business and you are in law or in government, and your husband walks in to give you breakfast, so what kind of environment are you working in that actually is going to be appropriate for the responsibilities that you have? I should have asked myself that question before we did this, right? So, and also, what about some of the deliverables? I mean, what are you asking people to actually produce? What are those things? And I want companies, and I want managers and presidents and CEOs to be thinking about these things, and whether or not these things are more appropriate for at-home work than whether or not these things are more appropriate for work at home. Because I want you to understand that if you say that this person and this person have the same exact job, but you trust this person to work from home and you don't trust this person to work from home, the opportunity for someone to think that you may be discriminating against this person for some reason, because just based on that visual, that person is in a protected class. because women are protected. And it goes for the same at other protected classes. But regardless of whether or not a human being is a legally protected class, everyone should feel as though they are actually being considered and thought of for who they are, and not for what other people's opinions or perceptions of whether or not we can trust them are. So there's always that fine line for me between there's a legal responsibility and maybe a risk, but there's a human responsibility for people also that the laws are based on, but I think we should go beyond them and not just be thinking about whether or not we're at risk, legally, but what are we at risk at as human beings in the way that we treat one another. So the first thing that I tell people to do is to do a job analysis. Now, I know whenever some people hear the word analysis, it makes them want to leave the room, like when somebody says, eat this, it tastes just like chicken. So, but analysis is not really that bad of a thing. It's pretty easy if you're organized about it. I think sometimes, though, analysts make it sound like it's really hard because analysts are very analytical. That's what makes them so good at it. But the job analysis data that you need to be thinking about is very simple. What are these work activities, these specific activities that make up each job? What kind of attributes do you need in the worker that actually does that job? And what's the context of the work? What's the internal and external environment? Also, what is the culture of the organization? So, pretty simple. The work context is really where we'd want to start with this. Sometimes this is the last thing that people think about when they're thinking about a job description, because I'm sure that many of you who have actually created job descriptions probably start with a bulleted list of tasks, duties, and responsibilities. But in this context of remote work, we really want to think about the internal and external environment of the job first. So I've got to move my face. There we go. Who are your customers, clients, vendors, partners? Just like I was saying before, what is the context of your work? Who are people interacting with every day? And of course, and our business environment. Are you normally business casual? I'm always so surprised. I'm a baby boomer, and I'm from New York City. And my mother would never ever bring the garbage out without putting earrings and lipstick on. I mean, this is just the way it was. When we moved to upstate New York and I saw people in the store in curlers, because it was the 60s and people still wore curlers back then. I would be tugging on my mother, Mom, there's a lady here and she's in her underwear, because that's how it felt to me. But so when we first started to, I've been doing Zoom meetings for a really long time, but not 3 a day, all right? Just saying. They were kind of far and few and in between. I would go to my home office in a tank top and a ponytail and no makeup. And every day now, I feel like I'm getting ready for, my soap opera debut, and I'm putting on, all this soap opera makeup every day so I can look good on Zoom. So, the idea of that business environment and how you're going to actually maintain that from a remote perspective. And that remote work environment, independent work from home with minimal supervision. That is an analysis that you would put in a job description. This is what we need. Somebody who can work independently, and we don't really have to supervise that a lot. Or we do need you to interact with team and your supervisor on a daily or a weekly basis, whatever that is appropriate for that particular job. But writing that into the job description even in a hybrid perspective, because most of the time when we're writing these job descriptions, I believe that the change the pandemic has brought is that we're not going to just see people just working from home all the time, but I think we are going to see a more hybrid model of at the office, at the place of business, and at home. I think that's what really is happening here. So the work activities is clear. Now, most of the time, like I said, people start a job description or job analysis with this big list of things to do. What does this job do? And sometimes you don't actually think about what the objective of the department or the team or the position is. Now, I say that to you because I think that we need to be considering a more team model for jobs than the individual model when people are working at home. And let me try to explain that. I have a client that had an accounts receivable department, and it's a medical office. And each one of those their jobs was very specific. Somebody who posted payments, somebody who did claims, and there was a lot of overlap. And everyone knew there was a lot of overlap, but still people had these individual job titles with all of these individualized bullet points on their job descriptions. And I said to the practice manager, well, what is really the objective of the team? And she said, it's really to manage patient accounts and to make sure that the patients and the practice are served through that department. I said, that's the first line of this job description, that this team is responsible for managing patient accounts to ensure that needs of the practice and the patients are met. And what we wound up doing is writing a job description that had that objective and not necessarily just the points that we wanted these siloed jobs to do. Is everybody with me on that? Are you hearing that that's a little different approach to looking at a job is to looking at the team or the department? So we changed the name from the AR specialist and AR coordinators to patient account coordinators because it made more sense. And then we started to look at what those tasks and responsibilities and deliverables were to achieve that objective of meeting those needs for the patient and the practice. And we wrote a job description that had every single thing that all of those people did. And some of those things were actually more advanced tasks and responsibilities, and we put them under a lead category. So essential duties for the entire job. When you first start, from the day you start to the day you end this job, you will have to do this list of things. Maybe when you're a little more experienced, these would be some lead things. And then we wrote this job description that said that these patient account specialists or coordinators were part of a high functioning team that individual responsibilities and tasks and duties would be assigned based on the team members' skill, education, experience, and that other people on the team would learn those things as backups to that person. Why that made such a great idea, so this is where this idea came from, where we were asking ourselves that the process required people to perform a lot of the same or similar tasks, and they were so overlapping that to try to assign a specific responsibility to one person or to one job description, not one person, to one job description, really became impossible. So, and one of the really great outcomes of writing that job description with the all people have to learn these essential duties, and then we have these lead duties, is that we started to get some of the entry-level people on deck and didn't have to rewrite their job description when they started to actually job shadow or take on some more lead responsibilities. And so now we have this team that is actually learning more lead responsibilities, and we didn't have to switch somebody's job title to do that. And the team is functioning in a much more cohesive way, and they understand where their overlaps are, and they accept them, and they're not, and they understand that there's no such thing as this is not my job. So it really did help. But so that's really an aside for you. So now we want to talk about the worker attributes. Of course, Jen, the first thing you're going to ask yourself is, what's the education and experience that you need from this person in order to complete the objective of the job. And I just want to say to you as an aside, don't limit yourself to a talent pool by being so specific about education and experience that you wouldn't consider someone who had maybe a lot of experience and not as much education. Because often I see a job description where it says bachelor's degree and 8 years of experience. And then you have somebody with, 50 or 60 college credits that's been doing it for 2 decades and really understands the context of the job and is a leader in that field. And you're not going to consider that person based on your job description because you've limited it to just a bachelor's degree and just this experience. Or maybe there's somebody with a higher degree, a master's degree, that only has 4 years experience, but they have a more robust education. So just an aside to when you're looking at a job, don't silo yourself into this, corner where you can't consider somebody you think might really be perfect for your job. And then specific, okay, I can say this. Position specific, there was a lot of P's in that sentence. Competencies, see, there's some more. For example, critical thinking, customer service, attention to detail. And what's so important about these and your value-based competencies, for example, reliability, integrity, and teamwork, is that you actually define what that means to your company. If being reliable means that you are available and accountable, then you have to say that it is the demonstration of. Because these competencies can often be subjective. Everybody has their own idea about what integrity means. Everybody has their own idea about what teamwork means. So if you're going to put, we really need a team player or we need somebody who really understands teamwork, you have to define what that means. And why that is so important is not just so people understand the culture of your organization, but also because of the things that we do are very rarely measurable. And when you define your position-specific competencies and your value-based competencies, you have some foundation for performance, especially in a remote environment. When you know that you have a reliable person and because they demonstrate it based on these criteria that you find to be the demonstration of reliability, and you want to explain that to someone who might not be as reliable, now you have actually a foundation for, your job description says that reliability is the demonstration of, and here's how I think you can improve in actually demonstrating that competency. Now, when I look at value-based competencies, I know so many businesses are taking a lot of time, boards of directors and the C-suites and employee engagement groups are looking at what are the values that our company espouses. What do we want to say to our customers, to our business to business, to our clients, to our vendors, to each other? What do we want to say that this is not just what we work at, but this is how we work? And sometimes those values are sitting up on your website, or they're on a pretty poster in your lobby, or they're on the refrigerator in your break room somewhere, and nobody ever talks about them again. We felt really good that we did that exercise about values, and we had a kumbaya moment, but now we're moving on. But that really doesn't that doesn't give any context to your value. If you actually take those values and make them into what you believe are the demonstrations of values and put those in your job descriptions, you can build your performance management system based on those. And I've done this 100 times, and I can't tell you how much more effective it is than trying to figure out how many widgets somebody makes when nobody makes widgets anymore. So it really does help. So once you're done with your job analysis and you have some really great job descriptions, now looking at managing this team from from miles away and sometimes hundreds of miles away, you need to think about, okay, who is good at what? And again, to keep this from actually being that where a supervisor is making a value-based judgment, I think that this person is better at this because that's my opinion or that's my observation. Having a little data around what people are good at actually helps them understand why you're making decisions about who can work at home, who can't work at home, who has this responsibility, who has this responsibility. Now, one of the ways you can do that is to actually assess your team. So this particular graphic comes from the predictive index, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only assessment out there. People use the DISC assessments. There's a whole bunch of things, but I would say the more simple your assessment is, the better people can understand it. I know that people were doing the Myers-Briggs years, and everybody would tell me that they were an EOFDJ or whatever. I had no idea what that meant, and after a while they just forgot what it meant too. But they knew what their letters were, and when you say, organizational psychology, it's like, well, that sounds really interesting. The Myers-Briggs is like the sacred cow of organizational psychology. But people who aren't into organizational psychology, it's probably better just to keep it pretty simple. So what does it mean when you're looking at this? Let's look at this first. At who is good at what. So people who are on these will assess on these scales of dominance and extroversion and patience and formality. So often somebody who is a supervisor is going to exhibit some dominance and extroversion. Usually a leader has actually demonstrated that. And often that person manages by watching other people. And now we're not watching people, or watching work. We're managing personalities, and we're managing competencies, we're managing things people are good at. So often it's really good to be looking at something like this, understanding that that people who are really good at structure are going to get up every single day. They're the formality indicator. They're going to get up every day, and they're going to get going, and they're going to sit in their chair, and they're going to just start to work. And people who are extroverts are probably not. I'm probably feeling a little like caged in that. Not me. That wouldn't be me. Yeah, a little bit caged in that room, all day long, looking at themselves, on a Zoom meeting in their soap opera makeup. So it's, looking at what people are good at is a good way to assign responsibilities and tasks and deliverables when thinking about how people work together. and thinking about how personalities actually are suited for different types of those tasks, responsibilities, and all of those deliverables. So if you see what I'm trying to say to you is that it's not about whether or not you're suited for the position itself, because people are in positions that require them to tap into different places in their personality. Not everybody can just go through life without ever having to sit down and write a report. Just because you are on the dominant extrovert scale doesn't mean somebody isn't going to ask you to do that someday. But if that's your main responsibility and all you're doing is analytical reporting work, and you are on those two top, you actually assess in those two top ones, eventually you're going to start to feel a little like this isn't the work I really love to do. This isn't what I want to do. And if you've got somebody on the patience and formality scales you're asking them to do a lot of like Zoom meetings and face-to-faces and connecting with people, they're going to feel like I'm just doing the wrong stuff. I'm just not doing the right things. And now when we're working from home and we're being asked to do things that we've never done before, it's important that you understand who your people are and why they're good at what they're good at, and not just be happy that they're good at those things. So also that helps with how people like to be communicated with and how they need to communicate with you. I often say that, when you're in a room filled with, having a team meeting, the people who are patient and formal are always thinking, well, I'm going to wait to say what I was going to say, while the other dominant and extroverts are hashing out whatever they're hashing out. And by the time the meeting is over, they've lost their interest in speaking up. And most of the time, you've really lost something in your meeting because that person most likely had a lot to contribute. And I tell people all the time, especially supervisors, the person that doesn't say anything in your meeting is the person that you have to look to and say, what do you think? Because they're not going to say, hey, I'm over here, see me, and they're especially not going to talk over one of those people who are going, hey, I'm over here, see me. They're just not going to. So understanding how to communicate, and then also understanding that there's that person on your team that always seems sometimes, maybe you've never experienced this, that to like dominate the meeting and talk a lot more than other people. That probably doesn't happen to you. It happens to me, just saying. And that's the time where somebody who is supervising a remote team especially, and so all these things are good tips for like in-person and remote, but remote, it's really important because especially in this environment, people are gonna, put their picture up and check out, right? And they might be listening, but they're probably over on their other screen or on their tablet doing other work while they're just kind of semi-engaged in whatever's happening with you. And that's why it's important as a supervisor in the remote team to say to that possibly overbearing team member, I really want to hear what you have to say, but let's hear from so-and-so for a minute. I want to get the whole team's opinion on this. So it's so important that that communication piece is really established, and a lot of times that introvert really needs you to reach out to them and talk to them, because the possibility that they're going to reach out to you is really often not as high as when that dominant person is going to do that. But one of the other things you need to think about too when you're managing a remote team is that you have to be be thinking about where your people are in the generations. No, honey. And so as you're looking at this, the baby boomers are much more reserved in our communication style. We were raised by people who called each other Mr. and Mrs. And we, you know, we were the generation that was seen and not heard, and we learned not to interrupt. So, and we really value self-learning. I can't tell you how many people I know tell me all the time, they never had any formal training in this, but they figured it out, because baby boomers will do that. It might take them like a decade and a half to go, you know, figure out Excel, but that's okay, because they're gonna be there. Because you know, remember, their work ethic was that they're going to work really hard, and two things were gonna happen. They were going to get rich, and they were going to go to heaven. Those are the two things that happened when you work really hard to baby boomers. And baby boomers will be there 15 minutes early in heaven, because that's what baby boomers do, because somebody's got to make the coffee. So they actually believe that the top qualities for a manager are being ethical and fair and very consistent, which is one of the reasons why they get very upset when things don't appear to be equitable, let's say that way. So managing a remote team for Generation Xers, they like to see change as a vehicle for opportunity, and they embrace this hands-off management thing. Like, they love it. They love the fact that they're working from home and they don't have anybody staring over their shoulder. And I'll tell you why. Because this team, with this group, this cohort of people, are the first people that were latchkey kids. And I know that I have at least one of these people who are my children, that they came home, opened the door, closed the door, locked the door, and the first thing they did was pick up the phone and say, I'm here, just want you to know I'm home, I'm safe. And then the thing that came out was, there's a list for what you have to do. It's there, or get a piece of paper and pencil, let me give you the list, what you have to do. And that should take you, you know, an hour. So you should start now. So it'll be done by the time I get home. And at that point, I know the phone got hung up, and that darling child went and played video games and went and watched some TV and listened to music and called their friend. And in the last 10 minutes before I got home, got everything done that I asked them to do. This is why this generation hates being micromanaged. Just let me do what I gotta do. Please don't tell me how long it's gonna take. I know how to do it, okay? And they're super results oriented. So this is the heart of our leadership workforce right now. So understanding how they need to be communicated and how they like to communicate, and also how they need to be managed, because it's really important, because this generation is not motivated by praise, but that doesn't mean they don't want it. So where possibly some of the younger generations are a little bit more motivated by, please tell me how you think I'm doing. This generation is not going to walk into your office and go, so what do you think? Did I do a good job? Okay, I dotted that I. I'll be back when I cross the T, okay, and show you how great that is. So they're never going to do that, but they do need you to hear that they're doing a great job. The millennials are looking to be coached and mentored. They really prefer that collaborative and tech-centric training. And one of the reasons for this is, you know, I've got a bunch of these as a kid, as my own kids too, is that this is the first group that had so many team projects in school that it's almost impossible for them to work by themselves. It's not their fault. It really isn't. I remember, I think I had like 3 team projects in high school, and maybe, you know, 2 in undergraduate. The world is working in teams, because the world was educated in teams. And often that's a little difficult for that individualized Xer and baby boomer to understand this group of people, how much they love to be working in a in the context of a team. And because this group is just so civic minded, they really love aligning with the company values. So that's another reason why this is so important, that you actually define those values in the context of what does it mean to actually demonstrate it. So this new generation, Generation Z, they're accustomed to change and they expect it in the workplace. The world is moving so quick for these kids that they're like, all right, what's next? And I also want to just make a mention that some of us might be a little concerned for our children and our grandchildren about what COVID-19 is going to do and how it's going to affect them and everything, all those things. And I want all of you to remember how the generations before them have really come through so many things, and so many innovations and strengths were birthed in things that were tragic. They were really tragic, but it made those generations, those amazing they called the traditionalists, the greatest generation because of the things they went through as far as the Great Depression and the World Wars, things. And I mean, we have to really think about how adaptable children are. I'm sure Trisha can remember the days that you had to go, you heard that loud siren while you were at school, not the fire drill. And then everybody had to go and line up along the cinder block walls that were the hallways of your school and crouch down and with your hands over your head, because the nuclear holocaust was coming. And clearly what was going to save us was putting our heads next to cinder blocks. I am still like, what's going on here? Okay. So I think we have a question. What are the ages for millennials and Generation Z? Well, the only ages or birth years that any of the scholars and organizational psychologists and cohort psychologists can agree on is baby boomers. That doesn't surprise me, actually, because so the baby boomers are actually from 1946 to 1964. Everyone agrees on that. And there's a lot of overlap with Generation Xers and millennials, and we're going to see the same thing with millennials and Generation Z. Because generally, and of course everything with a generation is a generalization, is that when there's new technology, that kind of defines generations, that new technology. So our parents, the technology was the telephone. That was their big technology. And then our technology was, because remember, it's not really about what we experienced in our lifetime, it's really what we experience in our formative years that really creates a generation. So although we experienced the telephone, clearly, it wasn't the new and innovative thing to us. It was the thing that we had, and it was normal life. So anything that changes the way that we do life and business. So right now, that's kind of all murky. I have seen that, that millennials are anywhere between 1970 or 1980s to 82 but it's really hard to define. What you do know though, because you've known millennials who are just like Generation Xers, and you've known Xers who act more like millennials. You know that based on the way that they communicate with you, the way that they see the world, the way that they interact with others, that they are exhibiting different types of generational characteristics. And it's important that you can just understand and then interact with that person from that perspective. So even though it's hard to pigeonhole the ages, then it is easier to actually think more about what are those characteristics. So Paul says, isn't it very difficult for a manager to motivate and instill teamwork when everyone is at home? I agree with you, Paul. And that's one of the reasons why I early on said the best way to begin doing a job analysis is to actually think about what is the team's objective, and to be reminding the team all the time about that objective, and what their contribution to that objective is. So it is difficult, but when people feel like what they're doing is really that contribution to the overall thing, then they feel more of a part of a team. And I think sometimes that we think of teamwork more of as all kind of like banding together and doing the job together. We're going to all dig the ditch. We're all going to put up the wall. We're going to paint the house, whatever that is. But it's more about looking at what people's skills and personalities and what they're really good at, and how that contributes to the overall, and how what can seem to be maybe opposing or conflicting personalities are really all about the complements that a team is, and making what could be conflict or things that oppose into, but that person fills a gap that no one else fills on this team. And it's important that we all kind of recognize that. So Jordan, who said, I never speak at these things anyway, so I'm turning off my mic, wants to know, you mentioned introverts not speaking up during meetings. I think you're funny, Jordan. What are good ways to get their feedback? Well, sometimes the best thing to do after a meeting is to do a little bullet point summary of the meeting, and ask for anyone that if you didn't say anything in the meeting or I've missed something, please, feel free to respond to my email or text me or call me. And often at that point, an introvert will actually go ahead and say, I did want to say something, and it's about this bullet point. So remember, that introvert finally found an opening in the meeting and on agenda item 2 or agenda item 4, and the thing that they wanted to say related to agenda item 2, which is why they're not going to say it, because now the moment was gone. So if you actually go ahead and list what happened at the meeting and the outcomes and the things that you agreed to, then that will give the introvert an opportunity to say, well, on that point, I wanted to say, and I didn't say it at that point. That is so much like school days. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But I tell you that when we're in meetings and people are taking their own notes, and I've given this advice to supervisors even before COVID and before we were working remote. It is always a good idea that when you have made decisions at a meeting, to do a recap with your team, and ask them, if I've missed anything or I've misinterpreted something, please let me know right away, especially if you've assigned something to someone and they can say to you, I don't remember you saying that in that meeting. So again, that communication piece is really important, and sometimes communicating is recapping. And it's really, and especially do that if you are having a one-on-one meeting with someone that has to do with their performance. Because I can tell you that probably what was coming out of your mouth that you thought meant this was interpreted a different way by the person who was on the other side of that meeting. So it's good to really get some agreement. And I love that word. At our meeting, we agreed to. And that's another way to actually look at things from that team perspective, in that we agreed that this was going to be our next step, or we agreed that this report was this person's responsibility, and we agreed that this was the process by which we were going to do this. We agreed. Sometimes you go, I don't, the introverts goes, I don't remember agreeing to that because everybody else was talking. So. Any other questions? I love it when you're asking questions. Where are we on time? We're done. We're just, and that's really good because guess what? I think the next one is a summary. See how that worked? So just a few things to remember is that remote work is here to stay. How we're using it is going to be based on the job that, you know, clearly we can't wait tables from remote. It's just not happening. But remote work for the kind of professional industries that most people are working in is definitely here to stay on some levels in a hybrid way or in an everyday way. And I would just say to you that if you're asking everyone to come back to work all at once and you're demanding that and you're not thinking that remote work is here to stay, that you have people in your business right now that are looking for other jobs. Because if you force them back into your office without any idea or even acknowledgement of the fact that people actually got things done from home, and there are so many people who have done such a fabulous job and in some cases even a better job at remote work than they were doing an in-person work. Perform your job analysis and identify those things that I gave you. And Bridget, somebody will send out this presentation to the members, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we will have it posted along with the whole program that we have here.
Perfect. Consider that team model for job descriptions when you're thinking about the objective of a team and assigning those responsibilities. I'm going to answer a question because I see it. I thought I saw it. Where'd it go? There it is. And it is, what do you do when someone performs better in the office than they do at home? Well, that I know that those people are there and they want to work at home still, right? Because, so I would say that that hybrid model of remote work, and when you send somebody home to do something, and if there's the possibility of a very specific deliverable that you are looking for with a deadline, that person who works better at the office probably works better in a more structured environment. So you have to create that structured environment for them when they're at home. And that environment has to have some boundaries for it, especially if that person's really social. Because a lot of time.
Mute and just ask you.
Sure.
So, and it's not about my personal business, but I know somebody who manages a team and they all do the same task, and they communicate there, and they're all things that can be done obviously from home because they're not interacting really with people. They're in an office. But they have one particular person who they've noticed when they were working in the office were able to take verbal commands easier than having to Discord and this and that. And this person is finding they're taking a lot more time to explain things to somebody, whereas if when they're in the office, they're definitely more effective and they're definitely comprehending around the first time around. I've heard, if they've got to read it, chances are they're not going to get it right. If they're in the office and I can just tell them, they get it right the first time. So and of course you have someone else at home that's doing great, and how do you bring one back and not the other? And you get into that fairness thing, I don't know.
Well, we didn't really get into it here because but there is a consideration. When you say that, I know exactly what the issue is that person is an auditory learner.
Yeah.
And not a visual learner. And so that doesn't mean that you, I mean, we still have telephones. We still have, you know, and believe it or not, chat box and texting is auditory to people. And the reason for that is because when you read a text, you're not reading content, you're hearing people's voices speaking. This is why people write the way that they speak. So my recommendation is, if that's still a good performer, I know that there's the opportunity for that person to feel like they're singled out if they're the only person that has to come back to work full time. But I would give them the opportunity to work from home, and the verbal command for the work is when they're, for the at home work has to happen at the office. So if tomorrow you're working from home, I'm going to tell you today what I need you to do tomorrow.
But it's all day. It's because the lead person gets the phone call from the customer and then spits the information back out to the support team, and they make the changes and they make the revisions. It's a fast-paced workplace.
I see.
So it's a salesperson and graphic artists. So the salesperson leads the team. Some, it's just while they're on the phone with the customer, I don't want to say yell out the commands, but yell out what this customer wants. They're picking it up right away and doing it. But when you have one person, and there's a mix, some home, some,
Sure.
But some are good at home and some are not, because they're not in the environment with the people. And it's hard to say, you're really good when you're here. You're not as good when you're not.
Right. Yeah, we're going to see this over and over again. And I'm just saying that I think that the hybrid model is probably the best model for that person. And if you can think of something that person can do that is, if everyone needs to be doing that job all at the same time, that's difficult. But if there's something for at home that's administrative on some levels, that might be the best idea for that person to do at home administrative work, and then when they're in the office they would be doing something else. I'm not sure if that's possible, but if it is, it's because it will. And especially if we're talking about, again, I'm going to go back to the risk of discrimination.
That's the tricky part. You don't want to fall into that, yet you're losing productivity because of it.
Right.
And it affects the bottom line, which is what big business, any business is looking
any business is looking at. But I would say a hybrid model where you basically are saying, you get one day off a week or one day at home a week, and here's what I want you to do from home. If they're not being effective at home, at all, it really is difficult to say whether or not, and there has to be that conversation too, though.
I know.
The conversation the conversation should probably start with some questions. Like, tell me what your most perfect work environment is. Tell me why.
Got it.
Instead
I think the tricky part is when when you've seen the difference. When you just hire somebody to work from home and yet you've never seen them work in the office, you don't know the difference. And when you've been working with them in the office for years, and then now it's like, well, why are we not jiving? Why isn't it happening? Why do we have to go back and revisit the same thing multiple times throughout the day? It wasn't done right the first time, or it needs more explanation than it has over the last, few years. I think that's where it gets tricky.
I think that those are really good questions to ask. Those are really good questions. Like, why would you think this is happening? Do you have somebody, because that person knows. You need to let them tell you why. That person knows why it's happening. They're not, people are intelligent, and they're more self-aware than you think they are. So I would really just let your friend know that ask those questions. It's so much better to ask the question and let them tell you than for you to tell them and then them argue with you. They can't argue with you if they've told you this is the reason why I think this is happening. And tell her, don't take I don't know for an answer. Go, well, think about it. Think why. Just make something up if you can't think of it, because if you tell them to make something up, they're gonna think creatively, and then they're gonna go, well, it could be,
Yeah.
and the could be is it is this thing. So just asking questions instead of what you want to say is just, you're so great at the office and you suck so bad when you're home. I mean, but as we all know, that people don't respond well to that.
Right.
So letting people ask answer their own questions is really the better way.
Yeah.
To manage that, and ask her to think of some of the questions she could ask that would draw that out of her.
That's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Do we have any more questions? I love questions. They're great. Okay. So again, consider that team model for job descriptions, and plan, assess your team to align your strengths with assignments. I know that this is, we got thrown into this thing, but it doesn't mean we can't take a step back and like kind of regroup and say we've been working in this way. We've tried to apply what we do in an office setting to what everybody's doing at home, and it doesn't always work. And actually just taking a step back and go, okay, so why do we keep trying to do it this way when we know it's not working? Why don't we try a different model? Maybe, and maybe we really do need to think about this as a team and how people contribute to the objective of the team. And maybe not everybody has to do all of those things that everybody has been doing all this time, just kind of trying to align that at-home work within in the brick and mortar. And I say, use individual assessments and consider people's generational preferences for their communication. Think about the way they need to be communicated with. Think about, most likely if you have somebody who is really, really great at organizing your world, that person is most likely a very analytical person who is not going to speak up a whole lot. Those are some of those things that go with it. Those extroverts are, I used to have a magnet on my refrigerator that said, dull women have immaculate houses. It made me feel better. Okay. So I'm just saying some of those extroverts are not going to be as more attention to detail as some of those other ones, and then consider the formality and the casualness of generations when communicating with people. So if you want to know, I think we have one more. Oh, do we not have that last one? Oh yeah, we do. Here we are. So there's mine and Trisha's information. If you would like to ask us any more questions, or you have an issue that you think that we could help you with, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that and see, how we could help. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's Anne Beecham. She is the Senior Consultant at Newland Associates. And Trisha Holliday, thank you so much for opening the Vice President of Talent Strategy at Newland Associates. I will tell you that they have helped our chamber tremendously. I cannot thank you guys enough. It really is about a personality and a good fit, and not just those bullet points in the tasks to do. So thank you so much. We enjoyed having you come on, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too.